Teraz privítam na pódiu Sue Thayerovú, na ktorú sa všetci veľmi tešíme. So Sue, if you would like please to come up on the stage and join us. Now we'll say a short introduction of yourself. I'm sure you'll join and tell us more. So ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to introduce today to you Sue Thayer. And Sue had worked as a manager at a Planned Parenthood clinic for almost 18 years. However, her story is one of change, and I'm sure she will tell us more about it. For now, I will just say that she organized a 40 Days for Life campaign in front of the very own clinic where she had worked previously. And since then, she has adamantly advocated for the rights of unborn children. And I'm so very honored that she has joined us here for the March of Life, or the National March of Life in Slovakia. And so, Sue, now it's up to you. Thank you.
Well, the honor is mine. I'm very happy to be here. My son and I are here. I don't know where he went. Kevin, where are you? There he is, in the black shirt. He is skipping college to be here for this week, so he's happy to be away from class and books and study. So, well, you heard a little bit about me, and just in the introduction, you learned that I've done a lot of bad things and made a lot of bad choices in my life, but God has indeed redeemed me and saved me. He rescued me from a very dark place. And in Uju's presentation earlier, she kept referring to the Western influence, and Bill Gates, and some of those names that we all know. And I can't take the blame for all of Western culture, of course, but to think that so many liberal Americans have so much influence all over the world makes me sad. But there are also a lot of great things happening in America, and we'll talk about that a little bit more today. This first slide kind of shows us what we've lost in abortion. And sometimes in the U.S. we call it the American Holocaust because so many people have died in abortions all across the world, but in America since Roe v. Wade. And it's hard to put... in our little finite minds, it's hard to imagine all the babies that we've lost. We really can't. So one of my favorite quotes is from Ronald Reagan. I've noticed that everyone who is for abortion has been born. So it's kind of a simple statement, but we liked it so much at the pregnancy center in our town that we put that on the back of our shirts, and found out that if you wear that shirt, that quote, to the airport or the mall, it's like a magnet for angry people. And they run up to you and yell at you and say, "My body, my choice. Who are you to tell me what I can do with my body?" And that it can be a little bit scary or unnerving the first time that happens, but it's a great opportunity to have a dialogue with someone that maybe doesn't think like we do. And so I try to wear a pro-life shirt every time I go anywhere because it's just good. Wanted to tell you a little bit about my kids. This is my oldest daughter. She is a farmer. Can you tell? Her degree is in agronomy. She loves corn and soybeans. She likes being out in the field, literally standing in a field. And she studied soil. And I made fun of her because I was like, "Honey, you spent thousands of dollars getting a degree in dirt." And she said, "Mom, dirt is on the kitchen floor. I study soil." And in Iowa, where we live, we have very fertile soil. So many things grow there, and it's a wonderful field to be in. So she likes to do that. This is my second daughter, Kristen, and she would never grow anything or be caught outside at all. She's a nurse. She likes to clothe. She likes to shop, and they're very opposite in every way. And that is the last three. Desi is on the left. She is 16 years old, and Kevin is in the middle. You met him, and then Zoe is the little one there. And yes, I know I'm on the older side to have a 9-year-old daughter. Sometimes people say, oh, your granddaughter is so cute. And I laugh and say, that's my daughter. And then they're kind of embarrassed because they think they've, humiliated me or something, but I don't care. All 3 of these kids were adopted. Zoe, I joke that she was an unplanned adoption. You've heard of unplanned pregnancies? Well, I didn't really intend to adopt Zoe, but I do foster care. And so she and her birth mother, who was 17 years old, came to my home and supposed to only be there 3 months. Well, Mom turned 18 and left Zoe with us. And by that time, we were, of course, in love with her. And so at the ripe old age of, I'm not even going to really say how old I was when I adopted her, but I ended up keeping her. And I will be a senior citizen when she graduates, well into my senior citizenhood. And but I think we're going to make it. It's looking good. She's in 4th grade now. She loves being outside, and so she sends her greetings. This is where I live. It's not always like that, but that was last February, this past February, and we get a lot of snow. That's me trying to touch the top of the snowdrifts. You guys get snow here, right? But not that much. I went to California. You've probably heard of California. It's always sunny and beautiful. And I showed this slide, and they were horrified because they've never seen anything like that. But that's a drift between 2 of the houses in my neighborhood. So we get a lot of snow there. So we have enjoyed your weather here very much. So that brings me to the start of my story. I worked at Planned Parenthood, and you probably have all heard of Planned Parenthood. We heard Uju talk about Planned Parenthood International, and that is the worldwide arm of Planned Parenthood. There's individual affiliates across Iowa that may have 2 to 20 clinics, individual clinics, and then there's Planned Parenthood Federation of America, that's the umbrella over all of those, and then there's Planned Parenthood International. And they are the ones that go around the world. And of course, when we had Barack Obama as our president, he was like best buddies with Cecile Richards, who was the head of Planned Parenthood. So they had almost limitless funding for abortions around the world. And when President Trump was elected, the first thing he did was reverse that policy. And during his campaigning time, President Trump is famous for his crazy tweets. And I think he tweets about every hour. And I don't know, he must never sleep. But I get up in the morning, and I'm not a whiz at Twitter. I'm not very good at it. But I'll get on to see what he said during the night, because he's always very entertaining. And when he was running, I would tell my pro-life friends, don't caucus. We go to the polls ahead of the election to cast a caucus ballot, and that shows what person might win. And I said, caucus for anybody except Trump, because he's never said he's pro-life. And the rest of them had all indicated that they would be a pro-life president, so I wasn't sure about Donald Trump. Well, then he became the front runner, and of course, I would definitely vote for him over Miss Clinton. And so when he won the presidency and overturned the funding to other countries around the world for U.S. taxpayers to have to pay for abortions, I was just so excited and elated. And of course, in the 2.5 years that he's been in office, he's done many wonderful pro-life things. And the most recent, I think, was he pulled $60 million in funding from Planned Parenthood through a program called Title X. And it's money that Planned Parenthood just gets to pay their bills. And that goes to them no more. And instead, he's routing that money to pro-life pregnancy centers. Yay! So I was very excited about that. And I think there's many more things to come. So I am hoping to see him reelected, because he is the most pro-life president I think we've ever had. But I started at Planned Parenthood really thinking that I was helping women. And this was in April of 1991. That's probably before some of you, I know it's before many of you were born. But I worked there in my own town The pay was fantastic, and the place where I worked did not do abortions. So I grew up in a secular family where we really didn't talk about abortion. And I remember in my interview for the job, they said, what do you think about our surgical services? And I was so naive that I said, what surgical services do you do here? And they said, well, we do abortions at 2 or 3 of our centers. And I said, oh, well, I think abortion is murder. And she said, oh, it's not murder unless the fetus is viable. So unless the baby can live outside the womb, they don't believe that, at that time, they didn't believe there was anything wrong with it. And I'd had 2 birth children by this time, and I said, I think there's a little heartbeat, well before 24 weeks, and I don't think that's right. Well, I left there thinking I would never get the job, but I was the only applicant. So they had to hire me. And I know they regret it now because I spend quite a bit of time talking about Planned Parenthood. But in my years there, I learned many things about them. And it's hard for me to explain how my heart changed because it was such a long process. But many of the angry people that we encounter as pro-lifers that are like on the streets, I was not quite that bad, but close. And I felt like what we did there was a good thing and that women needed to be able to have abortions. And over my time there, that really changed. And we'll talk about a couple of the things that happened that helped me change that. But one of the things certainly was something called Webcam abortion. And I know you're probably not familiar with that, but it's an RU-486 abortion. So you maybe have heard of that. It's a French abortion pill. And we did the clinical studies for it in the 90s in Iowa. So we knew well about it. There are pills that you take, Mifeprex, and it blocks the hormones to the baby. So the baby dies. And then a day later, the mom takes the next set of pills at home, and that starts the contractions. And so that was bad enough, but then in Iowa, Planned Parenthood added a twist even to that, and they decided that they were going to do them via Skype, so like a computer connection with no doctor on site. And non-medical people like myself, the center manager and the clinic assistants, were trained in 1 day to do transvaginal ultrasounds. Now, that's an invasive procedure. You really don't want the receptionist, the lady that answers the phone, doing an invasive medical procedure, right? But that's how Planned Parenthood works. And it's cheaper that way. And so we were going to all be trained to do that, and I became more and more vocal about what a bad idea that was. They weren't going to notify any doctors in the communities where they were doing this. At that time, we had 17 centers all across Iowa, and all of the managers wondered how in the world are they going to pay for that, because to do webcam abortions, they need to have a sonogram machine, an ultrasound machine, and they're very expensive, and they needed to have the webcams and the fiber optics and all the equipment. And so a man named Warren Buffett, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he is very wealthy, similar to George Soros, very liberal, favors population control. He wants to not only stop population growth, but reduce the population. So some of us here he may not like. I mean, who gets to pick who lives and who dies? But he was the one that funded webcam abortion in Iowa. So all of the family planning centers went from handing out birth control and doing screenings for infections to doing abortions. And I was very vocal about that. I felt that that was a bad idea. In my personal life, I had been in a large church in my hometown, and when we were going to start doing abortions, the pastor there said, can I come down and escort the women in to get their abortion? And I was kind of like, aren't you supposed to be on the other side? You know, aren't you supposed to be pro-life? You're a clergyman, you're a pastor. And he said, well, I was on the Planned Parenthood board in the last town I lived in. And I thought, I'm in the wrong church. And I discovered Christian radio, so I spent a lot of time listening to great Bible teaching on the radio while I was at Planned Parenthood. And if somebody would come in or the phone would ring, I'd turn it down and wait on the customer and then turn it back up. So I'm listening to Christian music all day, and I'm getting this great Bible teaching. And the Lord is starting to work on my heart, and I'm starting to think, I shouldn't be involved in this, you know. And in my early days at Planned Parenthood, I had gone to a couple of nearby abortion clinics and spent a day watching abortions. And I remember distinctly the first time I went, it was to the Des Moines Planned Parenthood Center. And the first day was really rough. I really didn't understand what I was going to be seeing, but they will stand you up against the wall, and you lean against the wall, farthest away from the patient who's on the bed. And I said, why do I have to stand here? And she said, most people faint the first time they're in here. And I thought, Well, I didn't faint. I made it. Through the course of that day, there was probably between 35 and 40 abortions. And as I proved that I was sturdy enough to take it, I got to go around to the end of the bed and actually see the procedure. And if you've ever watched one online, it's very similar to that, but there's a jar, a big glass gallon jar, hooked up to a suction tube, and they just suction out the uterus. And so the baby comes out. I'm sorry to be graphic, but abortion is graphic. They suction the baby out piece at a time, and it goes in this jar. And then we unhook the suction tube, the vacuette, and put it in this little door. And then we go around into that room. We call that the POC lab. It stands for Products of Conception, or sometimes we would call it Pieces of Children. And we take that jar out and dump it in a big strainer, like a colander. And then there was a hose that we would pull over and rinse it. And then we put those parts in this little glass bowl and take a tweezers and piece them back together, because we needed to be sure that we had everything. And until that part was done, the woman stayed on the bed. There was a surgical room here and one here, and then the products of conception, the POC lab, was in the middle. And I remember one point during that day, we were looking in this little bowl at the parts, and I said, there's a third arm. Why is that? And it was bent like this, little tiny, about like this, and the person training me said, oh, it was twins. Here's another little spine, just about this big, and a little skull, and there's another leg. And I said, I'm thinking twins. Do you tell the mom? And she said, oh no, it just upsets them. It doesn't matter at this point anyway. So I left there that day thinking, this is really tough. This is a bad thing. But instead of leaving there, I really committed to the family planning part of Planned Parenthood. And I was a sexuality educator along with being a center manager. And so we heard Uju talk about how they will come in without the parents knowing. They'll come into a school and indoctrinate those kids. And that was my job. And I was really, really good at it. And it was easy for me to get into the schools because teachers don't really want to talk about condoms and birth control and HIV and sexually transmitted infections and how reproduction works. They don't want to talk about it. So if I would call and say, hey, I'm with Planned Parenthood, I could come in and do a program, for you on contraception or whatever, whatever you want, they'd be like, sure. And that was the way I could meet them and tell them, you may not be having sex yet, but at some point you will, and I am your go-to person. You can come to the back door. I'll never tell your parents. And I did that for all those years I worked there. And I did it in a small town. I mean, Storm Lake, where we live, is a very small town. So many of my peers, my neighbors and friends and the people I went to church with, their kids were coming to me, and I was giving them things that were very bad. So I still feel bad about it. I know I'm forgiven, but it was a bad thing. And I would have them call and say, I found birth control pills. You are giving my daughter pills. And I was like, I can neither confirm nor deny that your daughter has been here. That was our answer. So we were very good at it. And it was really my job to sell Planned Parenthood and then eventually to sell abortions. Planned Parenthood buys the lowest dose starter pill that's on the market. So we worked with the ortho company, and they would buy whatever the new pill was on the market, and it was very low dose. So if a woman missed one pill, she was very likely to get pregnant. And then, of course, where would she come? Back to Planned Parenthood. And then we were there with the webcam abortion thing, and we could say, oh, you know, it's positive, you're pregnant, but we can take care of the problem for you today. 45 minutes, in and out, all you have to do is take some pills. So bad, it was all bad. And I felt, by the time I really understood and my heart was softened, I had done so much damage in my town that it has taken me a long time really to recover and figure out who I am and what I'm doing. But we ended up, the closer I got to the Lord, the more convicted my heart was. And Planned Parenthood knew that there was a change in me because I was more vocal about, we're going to have goals for number of abortions. I mean, they assigned a goal to each clinic on how many abortions they did or how many abortion referrals they did. And I'm like, seriously? I mean, this is reducing this whole thing to selling abortions. And if you hit your goal as a center manager, your staff got a pizza party. So they would give you this reward for hitting your goal. And it was just all bad. So the more I spoke out about it, the more I knew that I was going to eventually be fired. I was not going to do a webcam abortion. I really didn't care at that point what they did to me. And so I finally got fired, and it was a little bit scary because you saw I have 5 kids, and I'm single, and so I was like, well, you know, we'll probably have to live in a different house, a smaller house. In America, everyone is very spoiled. We all have our own big houses, and the kids all have their own rooms, and we have cars. Everybody has a car, and we're very spoiled. And I'm thinking, we may have to get a smaller house, and, you know, but I thought, it's going to be worth it because I'll be out of there. Well, once I was fired, it was such a relief, and I felt like I had shared a little bit with a place called Iowa Right to Life, and they're a pro-life group in Iowa that, just does pro-life things. And I wanted them to know about webcam abortion, thinking that they would somehow stop it or fix it. I could not believe that it was legal. It seemed like, even for Planned Parenthood, it was a step way too far. And so when I got out of there, I thought, I'm just going to get a normal job. You know, I'm going to get out of the controversy and leave this behind. I'm going to be a normal person, a mom, and it's going to be fine. I'll work hard, and this is going to be good. And God honored my efforts and sent work, and I was always busy, and life was good. Well, they started doing these webcam abortions at my former center within a couple weeks of me being gone. And I knew that because my former coworkers were telling me what was going on. And there were so many complications when they would take those pills that women were coming back in, and they didn't realize that they would deliver this little baby at home, and they would see the baby, and sometimes they would put it in a little bag and bring it back in. And this kind of shows, I know this is far away for some of you, but this is 7, 8, 9, and 10 weeks. And that is what those women were seeing when they would have these abortions at home and then return to the clinic with this baby in a bag. And so, but I was out of there, and I felt in some ways vindicated because I thought, I'm done. And that really worked well for me for 2 years. And then suddenly I thought, nobody is stopping this. Nobody is speaking out. And a man approached me and said, "What goes on at Planned Parenthood?" And I said, "Oh, you don't want to know." He said, "I really do." So I shared with him and about 5 or 6 other people what was going on at Planned Parenthood, the abortions, what a surgical abortion was, what a webcam abortion was, and it was bad. I could see on their faces, they were horrified to hear that that was happening all across Iowa, but especially in Storm Lake. And they said, "What can we do?" And my heart was convicted because here I'd been out for 2 years and I had never said a word. I was fired in December of 2008, and this was the summer of 2011. So 2.5 years I had not spoken a word. Well, I said to them, there's this thing called 40 Days for Life, and I don't know much about it, but I know that Planned Parenthood hates it. Because while I was still working at Planned Parenthood, they would people would come, and of course Planned Parenthood calls it picketing or protesting. When anybody's outside, no matter if they're standing there silently, they call them protesters. But they would come to some of the larger Planned Parenthoods in Iowa, and of course when somebody is standing on the sidewalk praying, whether they've got the rosary or the Bible or whatever it is, chaos reigns inside. Because, you know, the light of Jesus is on the sidewalk. Women don't come in. Their no-show rates skyrocket. You know, I shared with you that there are goals for number of abortions. So if somebody's outside praying, they're not going to hit their goals because women don't come in. So 40 Days for Life, I went home, looked it up online, and it was like the last day to sign up for the fall campaign. And it was $197. And I thought, I'm going to do it. So I put my credit card number in there and hit submit, and then I realized what I had done. Like, oh no, I'm going to have to lead this 40 Days for Life campaign at the place where I worked. And I was embarrassed. I didn't want to face my former coworkers because I thought they're going to think I've lost my mind. And maybe I have, I don't know. But I made the commitment, and as we led up to the kickoff, it was about a month later, you tried a 40 Days for Life campaign is 40 days of prayer for steady in front of an abortion facility. And in my mind, I thought, well, we'll pray for 15 hours a week, like Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, from noon to 5. And we ought to be able to fill that. And I couldn't figure out how to get the hours in the computer. You put them online, and then people can go to 40daysforlife.com and sign up to go and pray. I couldn't figure it out. So I had to call for help. I called 40 Days for Life, and I was crabby and not very kind. And I'm like, I can't get this. I've got to get to work, and I'm in over my head, and I need help. And she said, oh, I can help you put them in the computer. What hours do you want? And I told her, and she said, oh, you know, we usually pray for 24 hours a day. And I said, have you ever been to rural Iowa? I mean, we don't have that many people here. There's not enough people to pray for 24 hours a day. And she said, well, what about 12 hours a day? And I said, I don't think it's going to work. We're going to be embarrassed. You know, we're going to be humiliated because we're not going to fill it. There's not that many people here. And I'm calling my friends saying, hey, did you know they're doing abortions in Storm Lake? You want to come down to Planned Parenthood and pray for an hour? And they were saying things like, well, I don't need to stand there and pray for a whole hour. I can just pray as I drive by. So people were not grasping the concept of continual prayer. But we got to the kickoff day, the start of it, and Zoe, you saw a picture of Zoe. She and I pulled up in front of Planned Parenthood, and I pulled into my usual parking spot where I'd been for all those years. And I was like, Lord, I think I'm just going to pray from my van. And, you know, I kind of had a check in my spirit like, you should get out, because the idea is that you're praying in front of an abortion facility, not from your car. And I said, but God, you hear my prayers, whether I'm in the bathroom, the shower, the kitchen, the van, right? Does it matter? And the Lord told me, get out. You need to be out on the sidewalk. So we got out and spent the first couple hours there. This is a slide of a youth group in Storm Lake that came and prayed. And you can see the building is right behind there. We were able to be literally right on the sidewalk, which is very rare. That is our St. Mary's Catholic school that came down and prayed. And I mean, I promise inside, when they look out and see all those faces of those kids there praying, they don't like it. So there was lots of community support for it. When we first started, I don't know if you ever have that here, but we would have the Catholics praying like kind of in one corner, and then the Protestant people were here, and then the evangelicals were way over there. And I didn't know that, but they didn't like each other. And they're all calling me going, do you know how these people pray? It is not right. And I was like, let me get back to you, because I had no idea. So I took it to the Lord, and I was like, if this is going to work, you have got to fix these people or fix their churches or what is going on. I had no idea. But some people didn't like that they were praying the rosary, and then some people were praying this way, and they didn't like that. So we had a glitch in the beginning, and I thought this is going to be the undoing of the whole thing. But somehow they agreed to pray the scriptures. So we had but one Bible. There are no devotionals from any church, just one Bible, and they agreed that they could read the scriptures aloud. So we read Psalm 139 and Romans, some of those great books of the Bible, so many times there that we called it holy ground, and everybody got along. And by the end of the 40 Days for Life, we had 480 hours of uninterrupted prayer. And I couldn't believe that they did that. I mean, that it was a miracle to see it happen, especially, they were fighting, and nobody really prayed for an hour. What would I pray about for an hour? And it was a miracle to see it happen. And so different groups came and prayed on Sunday afternoons. We would go down. That's about 6 or 7 different churches represented there. And we would all pray together. And my focus was on stopping webcam abortion. I thought people needed to know about that. And several people, a priest, I heard him say, we want this place to close. And I said, oh, it's not going to close, because I signed a lease, a 15-year lease in 2008. So it's going to be here through 2023. And I remember signing it thinking, this is really job security, because I know I'm going to still be here. And sure enough, we got done with that, and within a month or two, they announced they were closing. And I was so surprised. I kept saying, I cannot believe it. I cannot believe that they're closing. And by this time, they had 29 Planned Parenthoods in Iowa. And this was the first one that closed. And now we have seen 21 close. So we had more per capita at one time than any other state in America. But now we are down to 8. So we're still working on the last 8, but we want to be an abortion-free state. So it was really a miracle to see what God did. So, are we pro-life? I'm assuming if you're here that you may be, hopefully, pro-life. There may be some people here that aren't, and I would love to visit with you later. I love to talk with people and get their perspective, because I've been on that side, so I kind of understand it. But I'm a born-again Christian, so when I look at life, I look at each one of you as a special creation from God, made in His image, with plans and a purpose and a reason for being here. And that is a miracle in and of itself. But you may encounter people that say, I don't believe in any of that. I mean, you use the 10 Commandments and say, it's wrong to murder. And when we kill a baby, that is wrong. And they might say, well, I don't believe in God. So that has no hold over me. So then you can always flip over to science. And we live in this great time in human history where science can tell us almost anything, right? You can get on Google and find out almost any fact. So, sometimes when I travel, I take these babies with me, because you can whip them out and say, look at this is how you started. And people cannot deny the humanity of a little tiny baby. And we know at what stage the heart starts beating, day 20, and when they have fingerprints, and when their brain waves start, and when you can tell if it's a boy or a girl. All of those things, because we have this window into the womb, and what a miracle that is. So it is becoming increasingly difficult for pro-abortion people to argue using science, because science proves that it is a life, and such a miracle indeed. Those are some of my favorite scriptures, why I do what I do, and people will say, oh, you're so brave, you know, you came all the way from Iowa to wherever I'm at, and you have so much courage, and I really don't. I don't think of myself as a speaker, like a professional speaker, but I love to tell the story of what God has done. And I am proof that if He can save me, He can save you. There may be somebody here who's had an abortion, who's had 2 abortions or more, but I can tell you with all certainty that God can forgive you. He forgave me, and you have only heard the tip of the iceberg. I mean, we used to have women come in and we'd say, well, it's positive, probably should just get an abortion. And I'd say, how much are you going to be able to pay today? And she'd say, well, I can't really pay anything today. And I'd say, well, how are you going to take care of a baby then? Have you priced diapers? Do you know how much a car seat is? We should probably just do the paperwork for the abortion. I'll get it faxed over to the abortion center, and we'll get you scheduled. So it was my job to sell them, you know, get like cows going in a chute on the way to market. That was my job, and I was good at it. So I've done lots of bad things, but I am proof that God can use anybody, and He can forgive anybody, and He has a sense of humor. But those are some of my favorite verses. This is a great slide. You know, they found that when the sperm and the egg meet, there's a tiny little spark. And if you haven't seen it online, you really should watch it, because it's just like the spark of life, and it's so cool. And from the moment that they meet, those 2 things, they start dividing. The cell starts dividing and becomes 2, and then 4, and 8, and 16. And it's changing every second. And that is the very definition of life. Each one of us here are growing and changing in different ways. And that is the very definition of life. And so we know that it is alive. Planned Parenthood is founded by a woman named Margaret Sanger, and she was a eugenicist. She believed in killing the poorest children and also any children of race. And that is the foundation of Planned Parenthood. They put their clinics in locations where there's a lot of poor women or a lot of women of color. That's why they target them. And they were in Storm Lake because we have 2 meat packing plants. And you may have noticed that my children are 4 different cultures, and that's because in Storm Lake, probably 25% of our people are English as a first language. So that's why Planned Parenthood was there. And those are the places that they like to go. And that's also why they go to Africa. They like poor women. They want to change the culture. They want to kill babies. It's their desire to kill babies and reduce the population. I don't know if you've heard of David Daleiden. He and a woman named Sandra Merritt took little cameras and spent 1.5 years inside Planned Parenthood video recording. And they learned and videotaped the fact that Planned Parenthood not only charges moms to abort babies $600 or so, but they turn around and take the parts of the babies and sell those little specimens for $75 each. So the heart, lung, liver, thymus, legs, brain, all of those are worth $75 each. This woman is Debbie Nucatola is her name. She is a top-level vice president in Planned Parenthood, and she trains the abortionists. But she talks about how they crush above the thorax and below the thorax because the fresher the organs are, the more money they're worth. And they use those for research. And then they have places like, they're called procurement technicians. And they go in and harvest the organs from here and sell them to big universities. So they make a lot of money. And David Daleiden and Sandra Merritt videotaped all that. and release those videos. This was about 3 years ago. They would release one a month, and they released 12 or 13, I think. And guess what? Because everything is so upside down in America, Planned Parenthood didn't get charged for doing this, but the people who made the videos got charged. 14 felony counts. They're in court this week in California. And they have been charged with all kinds of things. And here they were investigating and reporting, like undercover reporters, the stuff that goes on there. And so it shows that I think everywhere things are upside down. The scripture says that in the end times, what is right will be made wrong, and what is wrong, like this, will be made to seem right. And to think that they are in court for that is very sad. But it's a fact that they do that, and many Planned Parenthoods make extra money that way. This is a website called Number of Abortions. That is how many abortions have been in the United States. It's a rolling clock. Since January 22nd, 1973. It's a number bigger than we can imagine. We talk about the Nazi Holocaust, and that was what, 6 million Jews, 11 million total, somewhere in that vicinity. Horrible. I don't want to negate that, but you look at the number of babies. Here is worldwide since 1980, according to that website. Number bigger than we can imagine. And is this accurate? Probably not. It's probably way underreported. Sometimes people say, you know, if you close all the Planned Parenthoods in America, where are women going to get health care? And the blue spots on here are Planned Parenthood clinics. And this is even out of date because Iowa is right there in the middle. And about 3 of those have closed since this map was made. But all of these green spots are where women can go for federally qualified health care. So it's like Medicaid. And on a sliding fee scale, just like Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood only does reproductive health care. That's it. And these federally qualified health centers do everything. So they're tax funded. Planned Parenthood is tax funded. But why not have women go to a place where care is given by medical doctors? It's not at Planned Parenthood. Where they can get a full range of health care for them and their families. You can go in for a sore throat, a headache, a broken toe, whatever it is. But at Planned Parenthood, it's very limited. And yet they get such a large chunk of the pie as far as women's health care that it is just wrong. Couple slides about, well, this one is about in America, if you hurt the egg of an eagle, you will go to prison. Now, the eagle is the national bird for the U.S. We love eagles. You don't see very many of them. Their habitat is being destroyed. I would never hurt the egg of an eagle ever in my whole life. But we've killed 61 million babies, and yet if you drop an eagle egg out of a nest, it's 10 years in prison. Does that seem right? That we value eagles over human babies? But that's what we do. There's a visual of how many abortions happen in the United States in 1 month. You may have heard about New York. I think that made the news all over. The governor in New York State passed a law for abortion up through birth. So even as a baby is coming down the birth canal, they can murder it. And they were so happy that they'd passed that law that they lit up the Empire State Building, one of the tallest buildings in New York after the Twin Towers fell. They lit it up pink because pink is the Planned Parenthood colors. And so they celebrated that. Well, then following suit was Virginia. The governor there, Ralph Northam, he is a physician. He's a pediatric neurosurgeon. Took a sworn oath to protect life and take care of children. But to one-up New York, he wanted to pass a law that the baby could be born They would keep it comfortable, meaning it would get a blanket, and then he would have a conversation with the mom about what to do with the baby. AKA, in other words, do you want the baby or should we kill it? So that is what is happening in the U.S. And these are states that have advocated for that, and that's a scary and horrible thing. Abortion through birth and even after, infanticide. And in those videos that I referenced earlier, they had a physician in court when David and Sandra were in court that testified that they would try to deliver the baby alive because then there would be more opportunities to harvest parts. So even if it meant damage to the woman's cervix as they're dilating the cervix, they would do that without her knowledge, of course, in order to deliver the baby whole. Because a normal abortion dismembers the child. Arms, legs come off. The head is the biggest part. That's usually the last thing out. So they try to deliver them alive. And that is what these states are advocating for, and worse. If they found a single cell on Mars or the moon, they would say there's life. There's life on Mars, right? But yet so many people still deny the humanity of a human baby. This is a hard one. I don't know how it is here, but in the U.S., we do a test at about 16 to 20 weeks, alpha-fetoprotein test. And if a baby has the extra chromosome for Down syndrome, up to 90% of those are aborted. And of course, in Iceland, they say, we've eradicated Down syndrome. Well, they haven't eradicated the syndrome, they've just killed everybody that has it. If you have a baby with this, it's an automatic abortion. And how sad is that? One of my favorite signs, this guy standing outside of a Planned Parenthood. I know 20 families that are ready to adopt your baby today. We are here to help. Women need to know they have options. The people that stood on the sidewalk in Storm Lake in front of Planned Parenthood and couldn't get along in the beginning have started, 6 years now, it's been going, a wonderful pregnancy center where we have diapers and clothes, and we can help with food and even housing and transportation to doctor appointments and whatever, because women need to know that they have options and they have support. And so many women will choose life if they just have some guy like this standing in front of the place where they're going to get abortion. I know here you don't have clinics and facilities like we have in the U.S. They're done in hospitals, but a lot of times women will say, you know, God, if you don't want me to have this abortion, give me a sign. I don't feel like I have any other option. I want to finish school, you know, whatever it is. And there's every reason you can imagine for getting an abortion. But she'll say that as she walks out the door to go get an abortion. She'll drive or take the bus to the abortion facility, and she'll get there and she'll see a guy like this. And she's like, is that the sign? Is that the sign that I'm not supposed to do this? And she'll drive on past. And it is a miracle to see. Here's another great one. Look at the ultrasound. Now, people who advocate for abortion call themselves pro-choice. I say they're pro-abortion because pro-choice really means that they have all the options available. They know about adoption, they know about abortion, they know about prenatal care and parenting. But Planned Parenthood, I told you how Warren Buffett bought those little ultrasound machines when we started Webcam abortion. Well, they had a fantastic monitor on there, and you could see every detail on a baby. It was so detailed that some longtime Planned Parenthood people, when they saw the pictures on the ultrasound machines, quit. They walked out of the abortion industry. But when all of those ultrasound machines come, does Planned Parenthood show the picture of the baby? They turn that screen so the mom can't see it. And there's a Doppler on there so you can hear that little the heartbeat. That's turned down. They're not really about choice. They're about selling their product, and their product is abortion. This was a crazy day for me. I was in the UK, and they set up an opportunity for me to talk with Anne Ferrady. And is anybody here from Britain? She's a crazy lady, and she heads up the abortion industry for BPAS. And we had a talk, and nice gal, but she started right out and said that she believes abortion is murder at any stage. And I was like, because usually in the U.S. they say, well, it's not murder until the baby's born, or at whatever point they think is okay. But she said that she believes it's abortion or it's murder right away. But then she went on to say, we do 70,000 abortions a year, and we're very proud of what we do. And I thought, oh, so it was a great opportunity to hopefully plant some seeds. When we got done talking, she said, it was 90 minutes, so don't watch it because it's really long. But when we got done, she said, I'm not going to come to Jesus, but I can tell there's people praying for me. And I kind of giggled, and I said, that's my church. My church at home got up at 6 o'clock this morning to pray for us while we talked. And she said, I'm not sure I like it. And I said, could I hug you? Because I'm kind of a hugger. You know, Americans are friendly. I'm from the Midwest. We love everybody. And I was like, could I hug you? And she goes, yes. And she does this. And I did a little hug on her. And we parted. But I still write to her. And she probably just throws them in the garbage. But I write to her and say, Ann, I am still praying for you. If God can save me, He can save you. And keep thinking about what you're doing, because it takes a process to get to where you realize that abortion is wrong. Unplanned, you may have heard about that. It will come to Europe eventually. It's a story about a friend of mine, actually. She ran a Planned Parenthood also. And it's the realization that she came to finally by watching an abortion on an ultrasound machine. And she walked out, and 40 Days for Life was standing outside of her facility. My boss, I work for 40 Days for Life now. My boss is Sean Carney. And he was the person, he and his wife, that stood outside of her facility for 8 years praying. And they hadn't seen anything happen, and what if they would have quit at 7 years? But finally, by 8 years, Abby walked out, and it's her story of conversion, and there's a book out by the same name. If you haven't read it, it's going to be translated, I think, into your language, and that'll make it a lot easier. But I think if everybody could see an abortion, it would end, because it's that horrible. And this is a little glimpse into the abortion industry. She has an RU486 abortion, like what I described in the beginning, and it's very graphic, and they also show a couple of surgical abortions. That's Sean right there. Great guy. He's the one that stood there for many years, and he still prays in front of abortion facilities. We're headed into our fall campaign. 40 Days for Life happens in the spring, and it happens in the fall. And we're headed into our fall campaign, and it starts Wednesday. So when I get back home to the U.S., I'll be busy visiting campaigns, which is one of my favorite things to do. But you can see how many places there are. So we've talked about a lot of bad things, like the states that advocate infanticide, and the political process in the U.S. is crazy. All the Democrats advocate for abortion through birth and becoming a socialist country, and many crazy ideas. They want to get rid of cars and airplanes and cows. No more hamburgers because cows make pollution. So a lot of crazy ideas that are coming from them, but there's a lot of good news as well. And for 40 Days for Life, this fall we have 505 campaigns all around the world. 30 countries we're going to be in this fall alone. And we've seen 104 abortion facilities close. And mine in Storm Lake was number 21. So we've seen many close since then. We've seen 16,004 babies saved while we were praying in front of a Planned Parenthood. So it's a ministry based on prayer and fasting And I think that's why it works. That's why it's so successful. You're going to have a March for Life here tomorrow. And it sounds like it's going to be huge, and that's so awesome. This is the March for Life in Washington, D.C. And if you ever have an opportunity, go, because it is so fun and inspiring. I'm sure it'll be a lot like tomorrow. But the average age here is like 20. It's all college and high school students, and they come to the Capitol and march for life, just like what you're going to do. But it's interesting to note that in the U.S., this gets no coverage on the news. It's not talked about, so you probably don't ever hear about it, but we can have 400,000 or 500,000 people there, and they don't mention it, but then the next day, maybe gun control people will be on the Capitol steps, and there's like 24 of them, and that'll have like 2 minutes on CNN, you know, so it's kind of a tilted thing about what you see on the news. So, coming to a close. What time is it? I'm okay. That lists some things that I encourage people to do. I remember when we had our campaign, our 40 Days for Life campaign in Storm Lake, I would say, could we put a Choose Life sign in your yard? And people would say, ooh, you know, I don't want to do that. I'm pro-life, but I don't want anybody to know, you know, because they might think less of me. And so there's lots of things that we can do as individuals. Probably many of you are on social media, and that is a great forum to be able to speak out. And I'm so pro-life now that people know that I'm not going to change, so they don't argue with me a lot, I guess. But if I get it, I've joked about if I get in bed at night and no one has yelled at me that day on social media or Facebook or whatever, I think maybe I haven't said enough, you know, because we're called to speak out and be the hands and feet of God and the voice, you know, of Jesus. And we know that abortion grieves his heart. And as Christians, as followers of Christ, hopefully you all are, but it should grieve our hearts too. And we need to ask God how he can use us, because I'll tell you, if you ask him, he will use you and send you places, and you will do things that you never imagined possible, because that's what has happened to me. I realize not everybody has a crazy story like me, where I started by doing a dumb thing and work in the abortion industry, but you each have a circle of influence and people that you can talk to, and neighbors and family and friends, and you can be more involved in some way. I wanted to also say I brought some things to give away. There's probably not enough for everybody, but I have a big package of these bracelets like what I'm wearing. Reminds you to pray to end abortion. We hand out thousands of these lollipops, and you can't see it, but it has a little tiny pair of feet on there, and they're the size of a 10-week baby. And it's just a visual way to tell somebody that, you know, life matters. We have pins that say pray to end abortion, little stickers that say smile, your mom chose life. I have 3 adopted kids, as you saw, and I'm thankful every day that their birth mothers chose life for them, because I can't imagine. And Zoe, the little one that was on the goat, she's just like the light of our life. She's ornery and stubborn, and she's going to be a challenge in her teenage years. I can already see it. But she is so full of life. But her birth mother had an appointment at the abortion facility, Planned Parenthood, in Sioux City. It's about an hour from our house, to end her life. And that day, for some particular reason, her ride did not show up. And she never rescheduled. And I think about our lives, Kevin and mine and my daughters, without having her in it. We wouldn't even know we were missing anything, but it would be so empty without Zoe. So, but I brought these things to share. They'll be out back somewhere. I also have these wonderful little, these are 12-week babies, and I carry them with me as well. The ladies at the nursing home in Storm Lake wrap them in blankets for us, and then we carry them around and pass them out, because there's just something really good about actually seeing these and just knowing that that's how we all started. So I think that's all I have, except for questions.
All right. Well,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we have some time for the questions from you, from us, the audience. Ja vás povzbudzujem, aby ste išli na sleep.do, čiže na stránku slajda, a aby ste napísali otázky, ktoré vám počas tohto skvelého talku mohli vyvstať. Zároveň budeme príjmať aj otázky z publika, ale v menšej miere ako tie zo slajda. Takže ak máte príležitosť cez telefón tieto sa otázky cez slajdu naťukať, tak to prosím urobte. Alright, that was just an instruction for the audience. I'll start with my questions, so now they have the time to write theirs. You gave us a list, a very interesting list of what each of us can do. And I think as the fellowship, the Hannes Fellowship, well, what we've been trying to do is to spark a discussion, an intellectual discussion possibly. And so my question for you is, do you think, is this an effective way of approaching the issue? Is it effective to try to educate people about the ethical arguments behind their positions? Would you say that that's a good direction that we're headed?
Well, I think any discussion that you can have about abortion is good, abortion versus life. That may take place at the dinner table at Christmas. You know, you may have a sister-in-law that says, you know, I really support abortion. And that's your opportunity to speak up and say, you know, why? And it's not so much that we have to convey our thoughts as we need to listen to theirs and be able to understand where they come from. And usually I'm able to kind of get that because of where I worked, and I saw the agony of women that, you know, didn't want to be pregnant, and so many times I would talk them into an abortion knowing that that isn't really what they wanted. But being able to speak up, and I think it's important to try to find some common ground. So, you know, if a woman at an airport, say, approaches me because I'm wearing the Ronald Reagan quote, and she says, who are you? You know, who are you to tell me what I can do with my body? And she's very angry. To respond with anger never works. And to turn around and walk away is not doing what God has called us to do. Sometimes it's very scary. And I get that. And I've missed opportunities because I'm like, I don't want to talk to them because they're bad. You know, but to be able to respond with kindness and love and show the face of Jesus Christ is really the goal. And it takes practice to be able to do that. But I think you need to know why you're pro-life. If you are pro-life, why are you? If you're not 100% sure if you're pro-life, I would encourage you to think about why you're not. And research it some more, because if you look at the scientific facts, you will become pro-life. If you look at Scripture, you will become pro-life. So they both point in the same direction, and it's a wonderful time to be alive, because in 1973, when Roe versus Wade was passed, we didn't really have that window into the womb like we do now, and it was a lot easier to justify or rationalize it. There was no internet. The only way we saw an abortion was if you were in an abortion clinic, and now it is not that way. So we really are without excuse, but I think it's important to find a common ground. You know, say something like, did you know that an unborn baby has a heartbeat by day 20? And would you think that that means that that baby or that fetus or embryo, whatever you want to call it, is alive? Sometimes if you just say baby, it makes them upset. But try to find a common ground. And for me, a lot of times that works. Did you know there's a heartbeat by day 20? And they're like, seriously? And I said, look it up. And then maybe we part, but you're planting a seed, and it's all about whatever we can do to bring somebody to the next step towards Jesus, knowing him as a Savior, but also towards pro-life. So.
And when you talk to these people, what are the most common arguments that they use, or what is the position that they take? You described that with Anne, her position was slightly different than what you're used to. I absolutely recommend to everyone to watch the podcast on Unbelievable. It's great, it's unbelievable. But what is the common position in the U.S.?
Well, people are becoming angrier, I think. The division between life and abortion is deeper. I thought about sharing a picture. I was in Columbia, Missouri in the spring at a 40 Days for Life campaign, and the 40 Days for Life people were on one side of the street, and on the other side of the street was a radical left-wing group, and there was a couple of men, and they were, it sounds weird to even say it, but dressed in diapers, like a cloth here, and then they put on big condom suits. And so there's the top up here, and then their little hairy legs are sticking out, and their hairy arms, and they had a stick with gloves on it that represented sperm. And then there was a woman that had on the female body parts, big, like down to the ground. And he would scream and run after her down the sidewalk. And they did that the whole time that we were praying. And they will show up with trumpets and saxophones and the big megaphones, and they'll blow their musical instruments in these megaphones and then put them right here. So we're right in their midst, and they're doing their best. I mean, it's becoming less talking and more anger. And when they're like that, they're that far, it's almost impossible to find one that you can even have a conversation with. And they've told me they're coming to my home. They're going to show up in my church in their condom suits. And I mean, I've had all kinds of crazy stuff happen. But I had Zoe with me when those people were dressed like that. And she just stood there. And I was like, honey, don't look. Don't look. They're not thinking straight. And when I look at them, I realize that they're lost. They're lost like I was. And I couldn't help but think, as a mom with adult children, what did their mothers think? Because it was so awful what they were doing. And they really need somebody to come alongside them and take them out for coffee and have that discussion with them. But many of them are so angry that it's impossible. But I think when you talk about dialogue, if you can meet one-on-one with somebody that you know doesn't agree with you and have a wonderful open discussion, I think the battle for life is going to be won, in parliaments and legislatures, in the U.S. Supreme Court, which is soon going to overturn Roe v. Wade, but also in pregnancy centers and on the street in front of abortion centers. But most importantly, one heart at a time. When we support women that are pregnant and help them know that they have options and alternatives, I think that's really the best way.
All right, and now from the audience, George Soros has been blamed for a lot of the mischief that's been going on. So is it true, does George Soros, to your knowledge, a network of his foundations play an important role in financing abortions and abortion propaganda?
Well, the Soros Foundation is very supportive of population control. And many people will say to me, abortion, it's just so green. Green is this big thing. And anything that we can do to reduce the population. And I know there are cities that are very populated. There are countries that have more people than what they can feed. But we live, you saw, the middle of the United States in Iowa is fertile farm ground. And our government pays farmers to leave those acres of fertile farm ground empty. So they pay them per year, per crop season, because we have too much food. And, when people tell me, we can't feed all these people, and what are you going to do with those 61 million babies? Are you going to take them in? I hear all that stuff. But we literally pay Iowa farmers to not grow food, not grow corn or soybeans, because we have too much food. So I don't believe that the world is overpopulated. I think God created it. He knows every single person that's here. He knows the very hairs on your head. And what trust we can have in Him to take care of us. Does it mean that there's not going to be bad times? No. I mean, we saw people marched into the the gas chambers. So of course bad things happen. We're not in heaven yet. But we can't quit having babies. We've got Harry and Meghan saying, well, the most we'll have is 2 because we want to do our part. And we have, politicians in the U.S. that want to completely change the whole world and focus solely on climate control and climate change. So babies are God's gift, and I think the more we have, the better.
But coming back to George Soros and his foundations particularly, do you, from your time in Planned Parenthood or in your current organization, do you have any experience with these foundations?
Well, I've never met Mr. Soros personally, but I have met Warren Buffett, the person that financed Webcam abortion, and as far as I know, continues to finance those clinics all across the United States. And I mean, we had a guy named Joe Rosenfeld that donated like $3 million to have an abortion facility in Des Moines with his name on it. And it's like, why would you ever want to give your money to that? Like, why not an orphanage? Or even when I worked there, I thought, oh, I would never want my name to be on that. But there are people, George Soros, Warren Buffett, Bill and Melinda Gates, that are very liberal. Of course, we look at Twitter and, all social media. It's all censored. Lila Rose, I don't know if you're familiar with her. She runs a ministry called Live Action, and she's tried to buy ads on Twitter, and they will not sell her ads because they say she's too controversial. And she is less controversial than I am. I mean, I work for 40 Days for Life. I don't have my own ministry, but it's very censored, and it's because of people like Soros, Gates, Buffett, that's their agenda.
All right, coming to the second question. Why are abortions in the U.S. performed in clinics and not in hospitals? That's something that's a little foreign for us here.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of them done in hospitals also, but I think if we could close down Planned Parenthood, they do the majority of them in the U.S. Part of it goes back to Margaret Sanger. She's the one that founded it and just really believed in birth control and abortion, and as long as there is that mentality that it's a woman's right to choose to kill her baby, I think we're going to struggle with it. But the abortion facilities are just handy, I guess. Women go to them. They think they shouldn't have to drive to get there. They want one in every community. And that's a very sad testimony to think that webcam abortion is the most convenient way to kill a baby, so they want to do it that way. Now they have an abortion app that you can download on your phone, and 5 states in the U.S., they're doing like a test trial on that. And so you download the app and you can FaceTime with a doctor, an abortionist, and then they overnight the pills to you. And that is completely unregulated. So we look at the number, 61 million, we have no idea how many of those are happening or how that's going to spread, and where's it going to spread from there. We got the abortion pill from France, and the FDA had approved it through day 49 of a pregnancy, but right away Planned Parenthood did it through day 63. So if you think back to these babies, day 49, day 63, that's a big difference, and it geometrically increased the complication rate. So
the next question is in Slovak, but I will translate for you. So looking at your former colleagues at Planned Parenthood, what do you think are the reasons for why they are staying at their jobs, why they haven't yet realized what maybe you've come to realize?
Well, several of my friends that worked there were actually no longer friends. After I left, some of them felt bad in the beginning because I was just fired, but then by the time I became more public with my changed heart, they were angry at me. But Abby Johnson, for instance, I mean, she's doing fine. She has a ministry called And Then There Were None that helps women that are coming out of the abortion industry find jobs and whatever they need, a month's rent or whatever. So there's a move to try to help people that are in there, but it's difficult to come out because people look at you differently. Does that answer the question?
I think so, but maybe, is it difficult to find a job in particular after you worked there? Does it influence your resume as well?
Yes, it's very difficult, especially a higher level job. If you are familiar with the story of Kermit Gosnell, he was a late-term abortionist in Philadelphia, and they found like jars of baby feet lined up. It was a filthy, dirty place, but he would hire women from the neighborhood that barely, maybe didn't even have a high school diploma, no education, and he had them doing anesthesia because he knew that they would never get a better job, and he would probably still be going were it not for one woman there that took a picture of a baby that was such a late-term abortion that he said this one could walk to the bus stop. And of course, he's in prison now for what he did, but I would fully expect an appeal because honestly, the 9 states that I showed you pretty much want to advocate for all the stuff that Kermit Gosnell did, But back to my coworkers, I think one of the biggest fears that I had about doing 40 Days for Life was facing them on the sidewalk in front of where I worked, because that's why I didn't want to get out of the van, because I knew that they were going to be coming. And they did have some choice words for me. They were very angry at me, but I had thought about it ahead of time and what I was going to say, and I did manage to get out. God loves you, Jean. Jean was the one that really was angry at me, and I said, God loves you, Jean. And I had hoped to be able to say, and I do too, but that wouldn't come out. It was like stuck here, and I was not able to tell her that. But over the 40 days there, Zoe and I were there almost every day, and we did come to some kind of an understanding. They didn't like that we were there, like the pictures of all the students in front. They hated that, because usually abortion facilities are like in a strip mall set way back far from the street, and when you pray, you can only be on the sidewalk, so it's a long distance. But at the Planned Parenthood in Storm Lake, we could be right on the sidewalk in front. So it was very effective and very disruptive, I think, to their schedule.
And is it more common that people who work at Planned Parenthood are convinced pro-choice, or is it that these people just don't have an opinion?
Well, it's kind of a litmus test. It's a requirement to work there that you're pro-choice. For instance, I think if I was to interview there now and I said, I think abortion is murder, I would be escorted out. So they would never hire me now. They're very, very strongly pro-choice, and they don't let anybody in that isn't. But spending that day in the abortion unit and seeing the little bowl, the little glass bowl with the babies in it is like a rite of passage. Like you have to be able to do that to be considered for a long-term employee or as a promotion. 5 of the years I worked there, I managed 2 facilities, and I served 2 years on the Quality Assurance Committee, which is the innermost workings of Planned Parenthood. And I think it was literally because I could handle that. I had worked in hospice care before I went to Planned Parenthood, and so I had seen a lot of physical procedures, stuff like that done, and I had this morbid, disgusting curiosity about it, so I wanted to get around to the end of the bed and be able to see it and see the jar and see all of that. And I never did manage an abortion facility, but many days I rotated in and helped when they were short of help or whatever, so I'm thankful at least I didn't manage one. But it's an interesting note that I still live in the same town. I was born there, I was raised there, people saw me work there for all those years, they saw me leave, they're my friends and neighbors, And I still have women come up to me and say, you know, you helped me get an abortion. I hate you. And that happens to me, and I say I'm sorry, and I turn around and walk away and cry a while and feel bad about it. I've had women come up and say, I almost had an abortion. You know, here's my child. I'm so thankful I didn't do it. And I'm like, me too. But I've never had somebody come up and say, I was at Planned Parenthood, I talked to you, I almost had an abortion, I didn't, here's my child, wish I would have gone through with it. No one's ever said that. So there's signs, 40 Days for Life signs sometimes say, women regret abortion, and that's been my experience, because I have the unique perspective of living in the same town where I did all these despicable things, you know, and it's hard to see women that have suffered because of my time with them. You know, we were recently at a wedding, a friend's wedding, and the mother of the bride, they have a line with the parents, the bride and groom, and then the other set of parents. So you go through this line and shake hands, and we get to the bride's parents, who I didn't know. We were there for the groom, and she goes, oh, you helped me get an abortion. And I just stood there. I mean, my mouth was hanging open. My kids were right there with me. Kevin was filming for their wedding. And I just stood there. I'm like, I'm sorry. I didn't even know what to say. My 16-year-old daughter is standing there, and Zoe. And I was like, And so, I mean, sometimes that stuff still comes up, and it's, you know, you can leave, but it's still part of your past and who you are.
Another question. Mary Wagner in Canada was put to jail for handing out white roses in abortion clinics. How did the leadership of your center react to these prayers? Did you have any difficulties?
Well, anytime somebody is there praying, as I shared, women don't show up, and we may have a packed schedule for the day, and if there's somebody that shows up to pray, they don't come in. And we used to have women that would call and like pad our schedule. They were pro-life people that would pray on the sidewalk, but then they would call and pad our schedule so it would look really full. And then the doctor would come, or the nurse practitioner, and then only half of them would show up, you know. So there's all that kind of stuff. But if we would have what we called picketers or protesters outside, often Planned Parenthood would call their supporters and say, hey, we have picketers here, would you pledge $10 per picketer, you know, $50, because we've got 5 of them here. And so they would try to make it into a fundraiser, and then they'd open the door and say, hey, we're making money on you, just telling you, and try to make them feel like they shouldn't be there, because they really don't want you there praying. Your prayers matter. Even if you're in your van, they matter. But when you're on that sidewalk praying, you know, you are blessing the workers. They don't like it. You know, they may not admit to it, but they're lost. They're a normal person just like me that's lost their way. And they need prayers and love and understanding to come out of there. But you're blessing the workers and the women going in, the people going by. I mean, Kevin was much younger, but I remember him saying, Mom, they're waving with their middle fingers. You know, they were being unkind as they drove by. And I said, that's okay, honey, just wave and smile, you know, return kindness for their anger. But I think most of all, it blessed me, you know, being there praying, because by the end of the 40 days, I had such a close relationship with the Lord and with the people that I had been praying with. And, you know, as I said, we have this wonderful pregnancy center there now, and the town has really come together because of 40 Days for Life. So it's a great ministry.
All right, 2 short questions. Do webcam abortions occur in other countries as well, to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge, no, praise God.
All right, and the other one, can Donald Trump stop abortions in the USA, or is it up to every state?
Well, that's a complicated question, but you may know that the Supreme Court is who passed Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton. And because of those 2 rulings, we have abortion allowed through birth, really, in any state, unless a state chooses to pass restrictions on it. They call it a constitutionally guaranteed right. And, of course, it was just, people will say to me, you know, well, he's a man, who should he be to talk to me about abortion? And I'll say, well, abortion was passed because of 7 men on the U.S. Supreme Court. Not one of them had a uterus, you know, and they're the ones that passed this kind of, you know, in the dark of night without telling anybody. But we're this close to overturning that. And one of the Supreme Court justices, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, is 86. And she's had multiple health concerns. And she is holding on, hoping that Trump will not be reelected. And if he's reelected, I don't think she's going to be able to last 4 more years. And so if he has a chance to nominate a 3rd Supreme Court justice, Roe v. Wade will fall. I'm confident.
Thank you. We have the last 5 minutes, so we'll take one question from the audience. You can raise your hand if you have a question. We should have a microphone somewhere. If not, I will continue with the last question from Slido. So, should we be also focused on the legal aspects of, or the legal way of banning abortions? Some pro-life organizations are afraid to express that and suggest that we should only offer support for women. So do you think we should take legal action, or should we go for banning abortions?
Well, I think it takes all of that. It takes the parliament and the legislature, you know, as I kind of mentioned earlier. But banning abortions, you know, they say, oh, thousands of women will die if abortion is made illegal because they'll go back to coat hangers. The coat hanger is the symbol of women trying to self-abort. And that was such a rare occurrence prior to Roe v. Wade that I don't think that that's realistic. But we have women still dying in abortion facilities in St. Louis, Missouri, which is not far from our home. 80 ambulances have been there to take women out. And, you know, they rupture uteruses. They're not always clean. The Planned Parenthood that I worked at was very clean. It was not that at all. But we've seen into some of these privately run abortion facilities and some Planned Parenthoods where it's very dirty. And, you know, regulating that in the U.S., you can't go in and get your nails done or your hair cut in a place that hasn't been inspected. But you can go in and get an abortion, and there's never been an inspector in there. I mean, there's crazy realities. Like when my daughters were young, I would have to get a doctor's note if they were going to put sunscreen on for recess. But my older daughters could come to Planned Parenthood without my knowledge. Of course, I was already there. But they could go to a Planned Parenthood and get birth control or an abortion without me knowing it. So we need laws, we need regulations. Just like I told you, Zoe is here because a ride didn't show up. I mean, every little thing matters. God uses all of our efforts. And, you know, in Iowa, for example, I told you many states have a waiting period. So if you find out you're pregnant, you have to wait 24 or 48 hours before you get an abortion. Iowa doesn't have that. So countless women would come and get a pregnancy test and boom, have that abortion just in the same visit. And so any legislation that we pass, whether it's inspecting abortion facilities or hospitals that do abortions, waiting periods, doctors have to be on staff at a hospital. And no hospital in the U.S. wants an abortionist on staff because it's ugly. I mean, it's messy. Abortion is messy. And so any of those laws that are passed help. But we also have to just support pregnancy centers, I met a lovely woman that has been helping moms and babies for many years, 11 years, I think, and support those people that do that because every single thing that we do matters.
Thank you very much. That's all the time that we have on the stage, but if you'd like to ask Sue some more questions, she'll be outside and willing to discuss. Wonderful. So please give it up for Sue Thayer as our guest today.